In a village burdened by doubt and despair, a mysterious teacher tells a simple yet profound story about a farmer sowing seeds, setting in motion a journey of faith, transformation, and redemption that will change their lives forever. The village of Capernaum was alive with noise and movement, a tapestry of human endeavor under a blistering sun. Merchants called out their wares, their voices competing with the bleating of goats and the laughter of children darting between stalls. Miriam, a widow in her early 30s, walked purposefully through the crowded streets, holding her son Nathan's small hand. The boy's face was smudged with dirt, his eyes wide with hunger as they darted toward the freshly baked bread displayed at a nearby stall. Miriam's heart ached. She could see his longing, but she had no coin to spare, only a few scraps tucked into her bag for their evening meal. The air smelled of spices and baked goods, but for Miriam, it carried the bitter taste of desperation. Her husband's sudden death had left her with a mountain of debt and little more than their modest home. The looming threat of losing everything weighed heavily on her. As she moved through the throng, her neighbor Isaac's familiar voice caught her ear. The merchant, known for his sharp tongue and shrewd dealings, was haggling with a customer. Though she tried to avoid him, Isaac's sharp eyes landed on her. "Miriam," he called, his voice tinged with impatience. "Are you here to buy or just to wander?" Flushing with embarrassment, she shook her head and hurried past. She had no time for his taunts. But as she reached the edge of the market, she overheard a murmur among a group of villagers. "The teacher is coming," a man said, his voice low but excited. "They say he speaks words of hope and heals the broken." Miriam paused. Hope was a word she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Clutching Nathan's hand tighter, she decided that she would go. Perhaps this teacher could offer answers to the questions she dared not voice aloud. The hills of Galilee stretched wide under a clear blue sky, their slopes dotted with wildflowers and olive trees that swayed gently in the breeze. By midday, a crowd had gathered near a particularly ancient olive tree whose gnarled branches provided ample shade. Men, women, and children sat on the grass, their faces turned expectantly toward the center, where a group of men stood talking quietly. Among them was Jesus. His presence was magnetic, though his appearance was simple. He wore a plain robe, and his hands were calloused like those of a laborer. Yet his gaze, calm and penetrating, seemed to reach into the very soul of each person present. His disciples sat near him, watching the growing crowd with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Miriam found a place at the edge of the gathering, settling Nathan on her lap. She noticed Ethan, the farmer, standing a little farther up the slope with his neighbor Leah. Ethan's arms were crossed over his chest, his expression skeptical, though his neighbor's face glowed with anticipation. Nearby, Isaac leaned against a tree, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. He looked out of place among the hopeful faces, his posture guarded and aloof. When Jesus began to speak, his voice carried easily over the murmuring breeze. "A farmer went out to sow seeds," he said, and the crowd fell silent. His words were simple, but they painted a vivid picture. Jesus described the seeds falling on different types of ground: the hard path where birds snatched them away, the rocky soil where they sprouted quickly but withered in the sun, the thorny ground where they were choked, and the fertile soil where they bore an abundant harvest. As he spoke, Miriam felt the weight of his words settle over her. Each type of ground seemed to reflect a different aspect of her life. She glanced at Nathan, whose small face was turned up toward Jesus in wonder, and wondered if her heart had become like the rocky soil he described. When Jesus finished speaking, the crowd buzzed with questions and murmured speculations. Miriam noticed the disciples exchanging glances as if they, too, were trying to grasp the deeper meaning behind his words. Nathan tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, what kind of ground are we?" Miriam didn't know how to answer. Ethan, still standing with Leah, scoffed under his breath. "Nice words," he muttered, "but what do they mean? What farmer wastes seed on bad soil?" His skepticism wasn't lost on Leah, who nudged him sharply. Nearby, Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, voiced the question that many in the crowd were asking silently. "Master," he said, stepping forward, "why do you speak in parables? Why not speak plainly?" Jesus turned to him, his expression patient yet thoughtful. "Because the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven are for those with ears to hear and hearts to understand," he said. Stories reach the heart in ways plain words cannot. Those who are open will see the truth while others will not. Miriam felt a pang of recognition in her chest. Her life had been so consumed by worry and survival that she feared her heart had become like the thorny ground, too tangled with burdens to allow hope to grow. Tentatively she stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Teacher," she said, "what if my heart is like the rocky soil? I try to believe, but it feels like the trials of life always take away the little faith I have." Jesus turned to her, his gaze soft yet piercing. "The soil of the heart can change," he said. "With care, faith, and patience, even the hardest ground can become fertile." His words lingered in Miriam's mind, both comforting and challenging. Ethan returned to his fields the next morning, the imagery from the parable still fresh in his mind. The rocky soil, the thorny ground, it was too close to home. His own fields, neglected and overrun, mirrored the struggles within his heart. He stood at the edge of his land, surveying the work ahead. The soil was uneven, riddled with stones and weeds that seemed impossible to clear. Leah appeared beside him, her sleeves rolled up and a hoe in her hands. "Come on," she said briskly. "We'll never know if it's possible until we start." Ethan hesitated. He had long believed his land was cursed, beyond redemption. But Leah's determination was infectious. Reluctantly, he picked up his tools and joined her. Together, they began the slow, grueling process of clearing the field. Each stone they removed and each thorn they uprooted felt like a small victory, though the task seemed endless. As the sun set, Leah turned to him, her face streaked with dirt but her eyes alight with hope. "Do you see it, Ethan?" she said, pointing to the small patch they had cleared. "This is the start of something good." Ethan didn't reply, but for the first time in years he allowed himself to believe she might be right. The morning after Jesus' teaching, Miriam found herself lingering in her small garden. It wasn't much, just a patch of earth behind her modest home, but it had long been neglected, overrun by weeds and thorns. Nathan knelt beside her, pulling at a stubborn clump of grass. "Why are we doing this, Mama?" he asked, his small hands dirty but determined. Miriam hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Because we have to start somewhere," she said. She wasn't just thinking about the garden, she was thinking about her heart. Jesus had spoken of thorns, worries and fears that choked the word of God. Her debts, her loneliness, her fears for Nathan's future, they were the thorns that kept her from hope. As they worked, Miriam felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The act of clearing the garden felt symbolic, a small but tangible step toward clearing the doubts and fears from her heart. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning heavily on his hoe. The patch of cleared land was growing, but the work was backbreaking. Leah worked beside him tirelessly, her face glowing with the satisfaction of progress. "Do you think it'll work?" Ethan asked, his voice heavy with doubt. Leah straightened and looked at him, her gaze steady. "I think it's not just the land that's changing," she said softly. Ethan didn't reply, but her words stayed with him. That night, as he sat alone in his small home, he thought of the parable. The rocks in his field weren't just physical. They were the years of bitterness and despair that had hardened his heart. Maybe, just maybe, clearing the field was as much about his spirit as it was about the soil. Isaac stood behind his stall, watching the marketplace with sharp eyes. Business was good as always, but he felt a strange restlessness. Jesus' words about the hard path and the thorny ground echoed in his mind. When a poor woman approached his stall, her eyes downcast, Isaac hesitated. Normally he would dismiss her without a second thought, but today he felt a tug at his heart. "What do you need?" he asked gruffly. The woman looked up, startled. "Just a loaf of bread," she murmured, fumbling with a few small coins. Isaac handed her the bread and waved away the coins. "Take it," he said. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered before hurrying away. Isaac watched her go, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Peace, perhaps, or even joy. That night, a storm swept through the region, its winds howling and its rain relentless. Miriam lay awake, listening to the thunder and worrying about her garden. Would the fragile sprouts she had planted survive the onslaught? Ethan too watched the storm from his window. He thought of the field he had worked so hard to clear, now vulnerable to the elements. Was it all for nothing? When morning came, both Miriam and Ethan stepped outside with trepidation. To their amazement, the small plants had survived. In Ethan's field, the cleared patch was untouched and tiny green shoots were beginning to emerge. Miriam knelt in her garden, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. It was a small victory, but it felt like the start of something much greater. Word spread quickly that Jesus had returned to Galilee, and the hillside near the olive tree filled with people once more. Miriam, Nathan, Ethan, Leah, and even Isaac were among the crowd, their hearts eager and open in a way they hadn't been before. This time, Jesus spoke of a mustard seed, the smallest of seeds, yet capable of growing into a great tree. As he spoke, his eyes seemed to rest on each person in the crowd, as if he knew their stories and struggles. Miriam clutched Nathan's hand, her heart swelling with hope. "That's us," she whispered to him. "Even the smallest seed can grow into something wonderful." Ethan listened with a quiet intensity, thinking of his field and the changes within himself. Isaac, standing off to the side, felt a sense of clarity. The seed had been planted in him, and he was ready to let it grow. Months passed, and the transformation sparked by Jesus' teaching became evident throughout the village. Miriam's garden flourished, and she began sharing her produce with her neighbors. Her kindness inspired others, and soon the once isolated widow became a source of hope for many. Ethan's field, once barren, now produced an abundant harvest. He and Leah worked together to help other farmers, teaching them how to clear their own fields and tend their crops. Isaac's business thrived, but not through cunning or deceit. His newfound generosity earned him trust and respect, and his stall became a place where people came not just to trade but to talk and share their burdens. The seeds Jesus had sown in their hearts bore fruit, transforming not just individuals but the entire community. The hard path, the rocky soil, and the thorny ground had all been changed, yielding a harvest that was 30, 60, even 100-fold. And so, the parable of the scattered seeds became more than a story, it became a living reality, a testament to the power of faith, hope, and perseverance. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.